Lisa Campbell was the last one left. She sat in her empty bedroom at 2:33 a.m., surrounded by the ghosts of her dead friends and the weight of a guilt so heavy it had become a physical presence pressing down on her chest. The house around her creaked and settled with sounds that no longer felt familiar. Every noise might be her parents checking on her, or it might be something else entirely. Springwood had become a graveyard over the past month. The newspapers had started calling it an epidemic of sudden death syndrome, a rare medical condition that occasionally struck teenagers under extreme stress. But Lisa knew better. She'd watched each of her friends succumb to the thing that hunted through dreams, had seen the progressive deterioration as sleep became a battlefield none of them could win. Now she was alone with the knowledge that she would be next, that the creature had saved her for last for reasons she was only beginning to understand. The town itself seemed to be dying along with its children. Nearly half the families had packed up and left after the fifth death, fleeing Springwood like refugees from some invisible war. The remaining adults moved through their daily routines with the hollow-eyed determination of people who knew they were tracked but refused to acknowledge it. School had been cancelled indefinitely after Mark's death. The few students who remained rarely left their houses, and when they did, they traveled in groups and spoke in whispers. The normal rhythms of teenage life, parties, dating, casual socializing, had evaporated, replaced by a pervasive atmosphere of dread that hung over the town like fog. Lisa had attended all 5 funerals, standing at the back of each service while parents who'd once known her name looked through her as if she were already dead. She understood their avoidance. She was a walking reminder of mortality, proof that their own children weren't safe. But the isolation had become almost unbearable. Her parents had suggested therapy, medication, even a trip to visit relatives in another state. But Lisa knew that wouldn't save her. The thing that hunted her existed in dreams, and dreams followed you wherever you went. She'd tried everything her dead friends had attempted, staying awake for days at a time, sleeping pills, even Mark's approach of chemical numbing. Nothing worked. Tonight felt different, though. There was a finality in the air, a sense that the game was reaching its conclusion. Lisa could feel the creature's presence even while awake, lurking just beyond the edge of perception like a predator watching from the shadows. She'd stopped fighting it. The realization had come gradually over the past week as she'd processed the deaths of her friends and her own inevitable fate. Fighting only prolonged the torture, stretched out the psychological torment that preceded each kill. Lisa was tired of running, tired of the desperate scramble to stay conscious, tired of carrying the weight of survivor's guilt that grew heavier with each friend's death. She was ready for it to end. The music box sat on her dresser, a delicate porcelain thing her grandmother had given her for her 10th birthday. It played Brahms' Lullaby, the same song her mother had sung to her and David when they were small, the same melody that had become twisted and malevolent in her dreams. Lisa wound the key and watched the tiny ballerina spin on her miniature stage, arms raised in an eternal dance that would continue until the mechanism ran down. The figure was beautiful in its simplicity, frozen in a moment of perfect grace that would never age or change or die. The irony wasn't lost on her. She lay down on her bed and closed her eyes, not bothering with the usual arsenal of stimulants and distractions. Sleep came quickly, pulling her down into darkness with the gentle inevitability of drowning. The music box was enormous. Lisa stood on a stage the size of a concert hall, surrounded by velvet curtains that stretched up into shadows so deep they might have been infinite. The mechanism beneath her feet was a marvel of brass and steel, gears the size of wagon wheels turning with mechanical precision that vibrated through her bones. She was dressed as a ballerina, pink tutu, silk slippers, hair pulled back in a perfect bun secured with ribbons that felt real enough to touch. But when she tried to move, her body responded to the music box's rhythm rather than her own will, arms rising and falling in graceful arcs that matched the discordant melody filling the air. The lullaby was wrong, twisted into something that hurt to hear. What had once been a gentle, soothing tune had become harsh and atonal, as if someone had taken the original music and fed it through a machine designed to extract every trace of comfort or peace. "Isn't she lovely, folks?" a familiar voice called out from the darkness beyond the stage. Look at her dance. Look at how perfectly she spins." The audience was invisible, but Lisa could feel their presence, hundreds of eyes watching her performance with anticipation. Occasionally she caught glimpses of movement in the seats, shadows shifting position or the reflection of light off what might have been teeth. Her feet began to move without her permission, executing pirouettes and grand jetés. The music box controlled every aspect of her movement, from the angle of her arms to the tilt of her head, turning her into nothing more than an elaborate wind-up toy. "She's been practicing for months," the voice continued with obvious delight. "Ever since her little brother died in that car accident. Such dedication. Such commitment to the art." Lisa tried to speak, to protest the violation of her most private grief, but her throat produced only the faint mechanical sounds of clockwork in motion. She was part of the music box now, as much a component as the gears and springs that drove her endless performance. The stage began to rotate, slowly at first but gaining speed with each revolution. Lisa's world became a blur of velvet and shadow, the mechanical music growing louder and more discordant as centrifugal force pulled at her spinning body. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice announced with carnival barker enthusiasm, presenting the star of our show, Lisa Campbell, the dancing doll of death. "Watch as she spins away her guilt. Marvel as she twirls through her trauma." A figure emerged from the wings, small, familiar, wearing the same clothes he'd been wearing on the day he died. David Campbell stood at the edge of the stage, one hand on an enormous brass key that controlled the music box's mechanism. He looked exactly as he had in life, down to the grass stain on his t-shirt and the cowlick that never stayed down no matter how much their mother tried to smooth it. But his eyes were different, cold and accusing, filled with the terrible knowledge of betrayal. "Hello, Lisa," he said, his voice carrying clearly over the mechanical music. "Still dancing, I see. Still trying to spin away from what you did to me." Lisa wanted to cry, to apologize, to explain that it had been an accident, that she'd never meant for him to die. But her voice remained locked away inside the music box mechanism, leaving her mute and helpless. "You were supposed to be the responsible one," David continued, turning the key another notch. The music grew faster, and Lisa's movements became more frantic, her body pushed beyond the limits of human endurance by the relentless rhythm. "Mom and Dad trusted you to keep me safe. They said, 'Take care of your little brother, Lisa. Make sure nothing happens to him.' But you couldn't even do that, could you?" Each word stung, and Lisa felt something crack inside her chest. Not a bone, but something deeper, more essential. The guilt she'd been carrying since the accident crystallized into sharp fragments that cut her from within. David turned the key again, and Lisa's left ankle snapped with a sound like breaking pencils. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, but she couldn't stop dancing, couldn't even stumble. The music box mechanism forced her to continue her performance on the broken joint, each step sending lightning bolts of agony up her leg. "You were angry at Mom and Dad about curfew," David said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather instead of her worst failure. "So angry that you weren't paying attention to the road. Too busy arguing to notice the red light, too selfish to care about anything but your own problems." Another turn of the key, another increase in tempo. Lisa's right wrist bent backward with a wet snap, the bones separating in a spray of blood that stained her pink tutu. Still she danced, arms moving in their prescribed patterns even as her broken hand flopped uselessly at the end of her arm. "I called your name," David continued, his voice taking on the hollow quality of someone speaking from the bottom of a well. "Right before the truck hit us. I said, 'Lisa, look out.' But you were too busy being angry to listen." The music reached a crescendo that seemed impossible for human ears to bear, and Lisa felt her ribs beginning to crack under the stress of her enforced performance. Each breath was agony, each movement a fresh symphony of pain, but the mechanism wouldn't let her stop. "Tell me, sister," David said, leaning closer to the spinning stage, "was your teenage angst worth my life? Was proving your independence to Mom and Dad worth watching me die?" Lisa's spine compressed with an audible grinding sound, vertebrae shifting out of alignment as the music box forced her into positions no human body was meant to assume. She could taste blood in her mouth, could feel her internal organs shifting as her torso twisted beyond biological limits. But through it all, the worst pain wasn't physical. It was the weight of David's accusations, the terrible truth of her responsibility for his death. She had been angry, had been distracted, had run that red light because she was too self-absorbed to pay attention to driving. "I'm sorry," she tried to whisper, but the words came out as nothing more than the creaking of mechanical joints. "Sorry?" David laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of broken glass. "Sorry doesn't bring me back, Lisa. Sorry doesn't undo the accident. Sorry is just another way of dancing around the truth." He reached for the key again, but before he could turn it, another voice spoke from the darkness beyond the stage. Now, David. Don't be too hard on your sister." The burned figure emerged from the wings, dressed in an elaborate costume that might have belonged to a Victorian toymaker, dark suit with brass buttons, top hat tilted at a jaunty angle, and those familiar razor-fingered gloves gleaming in the stage lights. "She's been such a good little dancer," the creature continued, examining Lisa's broken form with obvious satisfaction. "Look how beautifully she spins. Look how gracefully she accepts her punishment." It moved with theatrical flair, conducting Lisa's performance like a malevolent orchestra leader. Each gesture of its clawed hands corresponded to a fresh injury, a new crack in her already shattered frame. "You know," the thing said conversationally, "I've been watching this family for a long time. Studying the dynamics, mapping the relationships, waiting for the perfect moment to strike." Lisa's shoulder blade snapped like a branch in a windstorm, but she continued dancing, her body held upright by the music box mechanism even as her skeleton disintegrated piece by piece. The accident was beautifully orchestrated, the creature admitted with professional pride. A touch of distraction here, a moment of inattention there, and voila, one dead little boy and one guilt-ridden sister primed for psychological torture. David's expression shifted from accusation to confusion. You caused the accident." "Oh, my dear boy," the burned thing replied with patronizing amusement, "I cause everything. Every nightmare, every tragedy, every moment of suffering feeds me. Your death was just the appetizer. Lisa here is the main course." It gestured grandly toward Lisa's spinning form, her broken body describing elegant arcs that painted the stage with droplets of blood. "But I couldn't have done it without her cooperation," the creature continued. "All that delicious guilt, all that self-blame, all that exquisite suffering. She's been torturing herself for months, doing most of my work for me." Lisa felt something shift inside her mind. The creature's words were recontextualizing everything she'd believed about David's death, about her own responsibility, about the nature of guilt itself. "The beautiful thing about humans," the burned figure mused, "is how eager you are to accept blame for things beyond your control. Accidents happen, but you insist on turning them into moral failures. It's deliciously irrational." David was staring at the creature now with growing horror. "You're saying Lisa didn't really kill me?" "Oh, she was driving the car, certainly. But teenagers run red lights every day without cosmic consequences. No, your death required a special touch, a moment of supernatural distraction timed to coincide with that delivery truck schedule." The revelation hit Lisa with tremendous force, but instead of adding to her pain, it began to transform it. The guilt that had been crushing her for months suddenly felt manageable. Not eliminated, but reduced to human proportions instead of the cosmic responsibility she'd been carrying. "You used my guilt against me," she realized, and for the first time since entering the music box, her voice was her own. "Brilliantly, don't you think?" the creature preened. "Guilt is such a useful emotion. It keeps humans trapped in cycles of self-punishment that make my job almost effortless." Lisa looked at David, really looked at him, and saw not the accusing specter of her nightmares but her little brother, confused, frightened, as much a victim of this thing's manipulation as she was. "I'm sorry you died," she told him, her voice cutting through the mechanical music. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you." The music box mechanism shuddered, gears grinding against each other as Lisa's acceptance of limited responsibility began to disrupt the carefully constructed nightmare. "No, no, no," the burned figure snarled, its theatrical composure cracking. "You don't get to rationalize your way out of this. You killed him. You destroyed your family. You're responsible for every moment of suffering that followed." But Lisa was no longer listening to its accusations. She was looking at David, seeing him clearly for the first time since the accident, not as a symbol of her failure, but as her brother who had died in a senseless tragedy that neither of them could have prevented. "I love you," she told him simply. "I always will. But I can't dance to your ghost forever." David's expression softened, the supernatural accusation fading from his eyes to reveal the confused 8-year-old boy he'd always been. "I love you too, Lisa," he said, his voice losing its hollow, echoing quality. The creature's facade was crumbling now, its Victorian toymaker costume flickering between elegant showman and burned nightmare. "You think acceptance will save you?" it shrieked. "You think embracing your guilt instead of fighting it will somehow set you free?" Lisa smiled, feeling her broken bones begin to knit themselves back together as the music box mechanism lost its hold on her body. "No," she said calmly. "But it changes the game. You feed on guilt and self-hatred, on people torturing themselves for things they can't control. Take away the self-torture, accept appropriate responsibility instead of cosmic blame, and you lose your power." The music box was breaking down now, gears seizing and springs snapping as Lisa's psychological transformation disrupted its supernatural machinery. The stage began to tilt and crack, reality reasserting itself against the creature's nightmare architecture. "I didn't kill David," Lisa continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I was driving when he died, which is a tragedy I'll carry forever. But I didn't murder him, didn't choose his death. Accidents happen, even horrible ones, and accepting that doesn't make me a monster." The burned figure was shrieking now, its carefully constructed psychological torture chamber collapsing around them. "This isn't over. I'll find new ways to hurt you. New guilt to exploit." Lisa nodded calmly. "Probably. But you'll have to work a lot harder now. And maybe next time, I'll be ready for you." The music box exploded in a shower of brass gears and porcelain fragments, reality snapping back like a rubber band released after being stretched to its breaking point. Lisa woke in her bedroom to the sound of Brahms' lullaby playing from the music box on her dresser. But the melody was clean now, sweet and gentle as it had been in her childhood, with no trace of the discordant nightmare version that had tormented her dreams. She sat up carefully, testing her body for injuries that weren't there. Her bones were whole, her skin unbroken, her mind clear for the first time in months. The crushing weight of guilt was still present, she suspected it always would be, but it had been reduced to manageable proportions. David was still dead. That would never change. But his death was a tragedy, not a cosmic punishment for her failures as a sister. Lisa walked to the music box and gently closed the lid, silencing the mechanical melody. In the sudden quiet, she could hear something she hadn't noticed in weeks, the normal sounds of a house at night. Her parents breathing in the next room, the refrigerator humming downstairs, the wind moving through the trees outside her window. Ordinary sounds. Human sounds. The sounds of a world where teenagers sometimes died in car accidents, but not because their sisters had been cosmically judged and found wanting. She'd survived, but more than that, she'd broken the cycle. The thing that hunted through dreams had lost its hold on Springwood, at least for now. Other children would grow up safe in their beds, at least until the next generation came of age and the cycle began again. Lisa returned to her bed and pulled the covers up to her chin, feeling genuinely sleepy for the first time in months. Tomorrow she would start the long process of rebuilding her life, of learning to carry appropriate guilt instead of cosmic responsibility. But tonight, she would sleep peacefully, secure in the knowledge that some nightmares could be defeated, not through fighting or running, but through the simple act of refusing to torture yourself on their behalf. The music box remained silent on her dresser, its tiny ballerina frozen in permanent grace, no longer dancing to the rhythm of guilt and self-recrimination. Some performances, Lisa realized, were meant to end.